Isabella Romano pressed her thumb against Adrian Valenti's contact name and held it there for 3 full seconds before she blocked him. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she finally loved herself enough to walk away. If you've ever had to choose between someone you love and the person you're becoming, this story is for you. Stay until the very end, because nothing about this ending is what you expect. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The fight started over a phone call Isabella was never supposed to hear. She had come back early from a client briefing downtown, still wearing her coat, still carrying the leather folder pressed against her chest, when she heard Adrian's voice carrying through the half-open door of his private office. She was not trying to listen. She never had to try with Adrian, because Adrian never raised his voice. That was the thing about him that most people misunderstood. The most dangerous man in Chicago did not shout. He did not threaten with volume. He spoke in a low, steady tone that left no room for argument, no space for interpretation, and absolutely no possibility of appeal, which was exactly why what she heard stopped her cold. Move her to the lakeside property, tonight. She doesn't need to know why. Tell her it's a security update. Her. Isabella stood in the hallway outside his office with her hands still on the doorframe and felt something in her chest go very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens right before something breaks. She waited until he finished the call. Then she pushed the door open the rest of the way. Adrian looked up from behind his desk. His expression did not change. That was the other thing about him. He could look at you with those dark, steady eyes, and you could never tell whether he was relieved to see you or already calculating 3 steps ahead. "You're back early," he said. "Who were you just talking about?" she asked. He set his phone face down on the desk. A small gesture, the kind that meant he was deciding something. "A security matter," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about." Isabella walked into the room and set her leather folder on the chair beside his desk. She did not sit down. She stood there and looked at him directly and said, "Adrian, that was about me. Say it or don't, but don't tell me it's nothing." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "There's been a development with Moretti's people. My intelligence suggests you may have come to their attention. I'm moving you to the lakeside property until we understand the full scope of the threat." "When were you going to tell me?" "When I had a plan in place." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have tonight, Isabella." She pulled out the chair and sat down across from him. Not because she was tired, because she needed him to look at her at eye level. She needed him to stop looking at her like she was something fragile he was responsible for maintaining. "You were going to move me to another location," she said slowly. "Without telling me, without asking me. You were going to have someone call me and give me a reason that wasn't the real reason. I was going to protect you." Those are not the same thing. Adrian leaned back in his chair. He had the kind of physical stillness that most people spent their whole lives trying to achieve and never managed. It used to make Isabella feel safe. Tonight, it made her feel like she was pressing her hands against a wall. "You know what my world looks like," he said. "You've always known. The threats are real, Isabella. They are not abstract. Moretti's organization has hurt people I cared about before I had the infrastructure in place to prevent it. I am not going to let that happen to you. So you make decisions for me. So I keep you alive." "Adrian." Her voice was very quiet now. "I am a crisis analyst. I have walked into boardrooms where companies were hours away from collapse, and I have sat across from people who were ready to burn everything down, and I have found the path forward. That is what I do. That is who I am. And you were going to move me to a safe house like I was a piece of evidence you needed to protect. You are not evidence. You are the only person in this city I cannot afford to lose." "That is the problem," she said. "You think love means you get to decide what I can handle." The silence between them lasted a long time. Adrian said, "What do you want from me, Isabella? You want me to walk you through every threat assessment. You want me to sit across the table and explain to you in detail exactly what Moretti's people are capable of doing. You want that conversation. I want you to stop assuming I can't have it. I am trying to spare you. "You are trying to control me," she said, and the words landed in the room like something physical. "And you have dressed it up in concern and protection and love and every other word that makes it sound like something I should be grateful for. But at the end of the day, Adrian, you are making choices about my life without asking me first. And that is control." He stood up. He walked to the window. She watched his back and the way he pressed one hand flat against the glass, like he was steadying himself. And she thought not for the first time that the most dangerous man in Chicago was also the most alone. "I grew up watching people I loved get taken," he said, and his voice was lower now, stripped of the control he usually kept over it. "My father lost 2 brothers before I was 12. My mother spent 3 years not knowing if he was coming home each night. I watched what that did to her. I watched what it means when you love someone in this world and you're not careful enough." He paused. "I will not put you in that position." "You already have," Isabella said. "You put me in that position the day I fell in love with you, and you let me. But you don't get to decide what I do with that risk. That belongs to me." He turned around. She had never seen that expression on his face before. She had seen him angry. She had seen him cold. She had seen him in the particular kind of stillness that meant he was about to make a decision that would change something permanently. But she had never seen him look at her the way he was looking at her right now, like something was slipping and he could not find purchase. "I don't know how to do this any differently," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what scares me." She picked up her leather folder from the chair. She stood up. She walked toward the door. "Isabella." His voice stopped her at the threshold. She turned around. "If you leave," he said, "and something happens to you, then it happens to me," she said. "And that is mine to decide, not yours." She walked out of the office. She walked down the corridor past the security team posted at the far end, and she took the elevator down to the ground floor. She got into the car that was not one of his cars, and she drove back to her own apartment on the north side, and she sat in the parking structure for a long time with both hands on the wheel. Then she took out her phone. She found his primary number. She blocked it. She found the private line he used when he didn't want records. She blocked that too. She found the encrypted messaging account he'd set up for the 2 of them in the 2nd month of their relationship, the one she thought meant he was letting her in. She blocked it. She found 3 additional numbers she recognized as belonging to members of his inner circle who would have been instructed to reach her on his behalf. She blocked every one of them. Then she set her phone face down on the passenger seat, pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, and let herself feel the full weight of what she had just done. Because she was not naive. She understood who Adrian Valenti was. She understood that blocking him was not the same as being invisible to him. She understood that the most powerful man in Chicago had resources that made the concept of blocking almost laughable from a logistical standpoint. But she also understood something that he did not seem to fully grasp yet. She was not blocking him because she wanted him to stop caring about her. She was blocking him because she needed him to understand that caring about someone without their consent is not love. It is something else entirely. And she was not willing to keep calling it by the wrong name. Her apartment was exactly as she had left it 3 weeks earlier, when Adrian had asked her to stay at the mansion for her own safety, and she had said yes because she trusted him, and because she was in that moment still willing to believe that his version of caring and her version of caring were compatible. The apartment was small by the standards Adrian had gotten her accustomed to. 1 bedroom, a kitchen. She actually cooked in a living room with bookshelves that went from floor to ceiling, and a window that faced the alley rather than the lake. She had loved this apartment before she met him. She had loved the way it fit her, the way she had chosen every single thing in it, the way nothing in it existed because someone else thought she ought to have it. She stood in the middle of it now and breathed. Then her phone lit up. Not a call. A text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't open it. But the number had a prefix she recognized from the secure communication system Adrian used for his most sensitive communications, the kind that didn't show up on any standard network. She opened the message. It said, "Ms. Romano, you have been identified as a person of interest by a party affiliated with Moretti's network. You are requested to remain in a secure location until further notice." This message is sent with full respect for your autonomy. You are not being asked to comply. You are only being informed." She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came in less than 30 seconds. Someone who was instructed to keep you informed, rather than to protect you without your knowledge. His words, "Ms. Romano, not mine." She set the phone down on the kitchen counter. She pressed her palms flat against the cool surface of the counter and stared at the wall. He had already changed something. She did not know how to feel about that. The next morning, she went back to work. Her company, Fortis Analytics, specialized in corporate crisis management. She was one of 6 senior analysts and the only one who had never been recruited from law or finance. She had come up through psychology and behavioral economics, and the work suited her in the way that only work you were genuinely built for ever truly suits a person. She spent the morning on a consultation with a pharmaceutical client whose board was fracturing over a pipeline decision. She spent the afternoon in a conference call with a Chicago-based logistics company whose CEO had just been indicted on federal charges that may or may not have been legitimate, but were definitely going to destroy the company's stock price within 72 hours either way. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. She was also aware with a specific and somewhat exhausting precision that she was being watched. Not by someone threatening, by someone trained and professional and careful. Adrian's people moved differently than anyone else. They occupied space without claiming it. They were always close but never visible unless you knew what to look for. She knew what to look for. She stopped at the coffee counter in her building's lobby on her way out at 6:15 and said quietly to no one in particular, "Tell him thank you for the text, and tell him that if he sends anyone to my apartment building, I will call the journalist who has been trying to get an interview with me for 4 months, and I will give it to her." There was no one visibly present to receive this message. She got home 20 minutes later and found a text from the same unknown number. Message received and relayed. "He says the journalist is a risk to you, not to him. He also says he knows you know that." She almost smiled. She did not smile. She typed back, "Tell him I said that if he has something to say to me, he should say it like a person." The reply when it came took longer than the others. Nearly 4 minutes. Then, he says he will, when he figures out how. She put her phone on the charger and went to make dinner. She was halfway through chopping onions when she heard something on the landing outside her door. Not a knock. Not a sound she could easily categorize. Just a particular quality of attention that made her set down the knife. She went to the door and looked through the peephole. The landing was empty. She unlocked the door and opened it anyway. There was nothing on the mat. She looked down the stairwell. She looked up. She looked at the door across the hall. Then she looked down again. There, tucked against the baseboard just beside her door, so small she had almost missed it, was a single black rose. No note, no card, no explanation. She picked it up slowly. The stem had been carefully prepared. Every thorn had been removed. The stem was smooth and clean, and the rose itself was in full bloom, the deepest black she had ever seen. The kind of black that in certain lights looked almost like it was absorbing the light around it, rather than reflecting it. She brought it inside and stood in her kitchen holding it. She had never received a black rose before. She knew they existed: dyed roses, hybrid roses, roses cultivated for darkness. She knew they meant different things in different traditions. Loss, farewell, rebirth, mystery. But she also knew Adrian Valenti. And she knew that nothing he did was accidental. Every choice he made was deliberate. Every gesture carried weight. He had removed the thorns. She stood there in her kitchen with an onion half chopped on the cutting board and a black rose in her hand, and she thought about what it meant that the most feared man in Chicago had chosen as his first real communication after she walked out on him to send her something beautiful with all the parts that could hurt her already removed. She did not call him. She put the rose in a glass of water on the kitchen windowsill. She finished making dinner. She ate alone at her kitchen table, with the rose visible in her peripheral vision, and the city visible beyond the window, and the weight of the last 48 hours settling into her bones. Her phone buzzed once. The unknown number again. Just 3 words. How is it? She looked at the rows for a long moment. Then she typed back, alive. Like someone who knew what they were doing took care of it before it got here. His reply came in less than a minute. Someone did. She set the phone down. She did not sleep well that night, but not because she was afraid. She did not sleep well because something had shifted, and she could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. Something between them had cracked open slightly. Not broken, not repaired, just open. And open things were always more dangerous than closed ones, because open things had the potential to become something new. The question was whether she was willing to find out what. 3 days passed. On the 2nd day, she got a call from her colleague Marcus, who handled the firm's security architecture. He told her that someone had accessed and flagged a record in a database that should not have had her name in it. A low-level Moretti affiliate had pulled her professional profile from what appeared to be a legitimate business database and had cross-referenced it with several known addresses in the North Side. Her blood went cold, not with fear for herself, with a very sharp and specific understanding of what it meant that Moretti's people were looking at her professionally as well as personally. It meant they were not looking at her as Adrian's girlfriend. They were looking at her as someone whose expertise and access could be leveraged. She called Marcus back and said, "I need you to tell me exactly which databases were accessed and when." He told her. She spent the next 3 hours mapping the access pattern. It was not random. It was methodical. The kind of methodical that suggested someone inside a structured organization who had been given a specific research directive rather than someone making independent choices. Someone had pointed Moretti's people at her deliberately. She sat with that for a moment. Then she pulled out a clean notepad and started writing down every name she knew inside Adrian's organization who had enough access to her personal and professional information to make her a target in this specific and structured way. The list was shorter than she expected. 3 names. She stared at those 3 names for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and opened her messages with the unknown number. She typed, "I need to talk to him." The reply came in under a minute. "He knows. He's been waiting for you to say that." She stared at the message. Then she typed, "Tell him to come here. Not the mansion, not a safe house. Here, my apartment. Like a person." She set the phone down and looked at the black rose still sitting in the glass on her windowsill. It had not wilted. 3 days, and it was still as full and dark as the night she found it. She thought about what kind of care that required, the kind of attention, the kind of knowledge about something fragile that lets you keep it alive longer than it would last on its own. Her intercom buzzed at 9:47 that night. She pressed the button without asking who it was. She already knew. She heard the elevator. She heard footsteps in the corridor, not multiple sets of footsteps, just one. She knew that meant he had come without his security team, or had left them in the stairwell with very specific instructions to stay out of sight, which was not the same thing as coming alone, but was for Adrian Valenti probably the closest approximation of alone that was physically possible. The knock at her door was measured, not tentative, not demanding, just a knock, the kind that acknowledged her right to open it or not. She opened it. Adrian Valenti stood in her doorway in a dark coat, no tie, his hands at his sides. He looked exactly the same as he always did, composed, controlled, that stillness that used to feel like safety, except that his eyes were different. She had spent long enough studying people's eyes in crisis situations to know what it looked like when someone was carrying something heavy, and had been carrying it for long enough that they had stopped trying to hide the weight. He was not hiding it tonight. "You came," she said. "You asked me to come like a person," he said. "So I came like a person." She stepped back from the door. He came inside. He stopped in the middle of her living room and looked at the bookshelves, the kitchen table, the window that faced the alley. He looked at all the ways her apartment was nothing like the mansion and everything like her. Then he looked at the black rose on the windowsill. He looked at it for a long moment. "It's still alive," he said. "It is," she said. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. He turned to face her. "I want to talk to you about something," she said. "And I need you to listen the way you would listen to someone whose judgment you trust, not the way you listen to someone you're trying to protect." He held her gaze. "All right," he said. She picked up the notepad from the kitchen counter and held it out to him. He looked at the three names. His expression did not change visibly, but she watched his eyes move across the names once, then again. She watched the stillness in him shift into something else, something colder and more focused, the particular quality of attention that meant his mind was moving very fast under a very controlled surface. "Where did you get this?" he said. "My colleague identified an irregular database access pattern targeting my professional profile," she said. "Someone pointed Moretti's people at me specifically. It was not random. It was researched. And the only people who had enough access to both my personal and professional information to build that kind of targeting profile are on that list." He set the notepad down on her kitchen counter. "Isabella, I know what you're about to say," she said. "You're about to tell me that this is exactly why you wanted me somewhere safe. You're about to tell me that me being here doing this, figuring this out on my own, proves that the threat is real, and that I should have listened to you." He stopped. "Is that what you were about to say?" she asked. A long pause. "Yes," he said. "I know," she said. "And I need you to hear something important. The fact that the threat is real does not mean your solution was right. You can be correct about the danger and still be wrong about how to handle it. Both of those things can be true at the same time." He looked at her. "I know that too," he said quietly. "I'm starting to understand that." She walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on because she needed something to do with her hands, and because the conversation was reaching a depth where she needed the small physical anchor of something ordinary. "There's a traitor in your organization," she said. "One of those three people on that list is feeding information to Moretti. And the reason I can figure that out from my kitchen table with a notepad is because I am very good at what I do. And that is something you need to start actually believing rather than theoretically acknowledging." He came to stand at the kitchen counter, not beside her, across from her, the counter between them. "I believe it," he said. "Then show me," she said. "Not by stepping aside and letting me run this alone. Not by insisting on controlling every piece of it. Show me by working with me, actually with me, like I am a partner." He was quiet for a long moment. She poured hot water over the tea and set a mug on his side of the counter. He looked at the mug, then at her. "I don't know if I know how to do that," he said. "Not because I don't respect you. Because in my world, bringing someone in means putting them at greater risk. The more you know, the more valuable you become to the wrong people." "Adrian," she said, "they already found me. I am already valuable to the wrong people. The only question now is whether I'm going to face that standing beside you with full information, or whether I'm going to face it alone with half of it." He picked up the mug. He looked at the black rose on the windowsill again. "The rose," he said. "The thorns." He paused. "I thought about it for a long time before I sent it. What I wanted to say. How to say it. And everything I came up with sounded like an explanation, and an explanation is not the same as an apology." "No," she agreed. "It's not. So I sent the rose," he said, "because I knew you would understand what I meant." She looked at him across her kitchen counter. "I did," she said. "I understood." "And?" he said. She looked at the rose. Then she looked back at him. "And I think," she said carefully, "that understanding what you meant is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one." He nodded slowly. "Then let's have the conversation," he said. She picked up her own mug. She looked at the three names on the notepad. "Tell me everything you know about those three people," she said. "Not what you think I need to know. Everything." He set his mug down. He pulled out the chair on his side of the kitchen counter and sat down. And for the first time since Isabella had walked out of his mansion 2 nights ago, Adrian Valenti looked at her, not like something he needed to keep safe, but like someone he needed on his side. He started talking, and she listened and questioned and pushed back when his reasoning had gaps, and he accepted the pushback without deflecting. And outside the window, the city moved through its ordinary late evening rhythms, and the black rose stood in its glass on the windowsill, without wilting, and something between them that had cracked open 2 nights ago in the hallway of his mansion was becoming slowly and tentatively, and with great care, something that looked less like a fracture and more like a door. She did not know yet whether she would walk through it, but she knew for the first time in a long time that the choice was entirely hers, and that made all the difference. He talked for 2 hours. Isabella did not interrupt except when she needed clarification, and she needed clarification more than once, because Adrian's world had layers that even she, after 18 months of being close to him, had not fully understood. He had never wanted her to fully understand. Not because he was hiding things from her, the way a person hides guilt, but because he had genuinely believed that understanding his world completely would cost her something she could not get back. She let him finish before she told him that it already had. "The 3 names," she said, when he finally sat back and wrapped both hands around a mug that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. "Walk me through your read on each one." "Dante," he said, and the way he said the name told her something immediately. There was weight in it. Old weight. "He's been with my family since before I took over the organization. He handled logistics for my father. He's 61 years old, and he has a daughter in graduate school in Boston and a wife who has been sick for 3 years. I have covered every medical bill without him asking." "Which means he owes you," Isabella said. "Which means he's loyal," Adrian said. "Those are not always the same thing," she said. "Someone who owes a debt can resent the debtor just as much as they depend on them, sometimes more." He looked at her. "You think it's Dante?" "I didn't say that. I said owing someone and being loyal to someone are different things. Keep going." "Marco?" he said, and his voice went flatter. Not colder. Flatter, which meant he was controlling something. "Marco has been with me directly for 6 years. He runs internal communications. Every encrypted channel, every secure line. If someone inside the organization wanted to feed information to Moretti without leaving traces, Marco would know exactly how to do it." "And the third?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Lena," he said. Isabella had not expected that name. She had seen Lena Caruso at 3 or 4 events over the past year and a half. A woman in her mid-30s, sharp and quiet, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke, and whose listening felt purposeful rather than passive. "What does Lena do?" Isabella asked, because she realized she had never known precisely. "She manages relationships," Adrian said. "That's the simplest way to describe it. She knows who matters to whom inside and outside the organization. She maintains the network of contacts that keeps my operation invisible to the people who are looking for it." "So she knows everything about everyone?" "Yes." "And she knows me?" "Yes." Isabella was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How well does she know me?" Adrian met her eyes. "Well enough that I asked her 6 months ago to make sure your professional profile stayed clean. Off certain lists. Out of certain databases." The silence that followed lasted long enough for both of them to understand what it meant. "She had access to the exact information someone used to build a targeting profile on me," Isabella said. "Yes," Adrian said. His voice was very controlled now. "And you trusted her to protect that information." "I trusted her completely," he said. And then lower, "I thought I did." Isabella stood up from the kitchen table. She walked to the window and looked at the rose without touching it. "If it's Lena," she said, "she is not just feeding information to Moretti. She is specifically and deliberately exposing me. That is not opportunistic. That is intentional." "I know." "Which means someone gave her a reason specific to me." Adrian stood up too. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whoever is working with Moretti is not just trying to damage your organization," Isabella said, turning to face him. "They are trying to use me as the instrument of that damage. Because if something happens to me, It does not just hurt you strategically. It breaks you. And whoever is doing this knows you well enough to know that. Adrian said nothing. But she watched the expression move through his eyes, and she knew she was right. "The rose," she said quietly. "The decision to remove the thorns. Who knew you were planning to do that?" His jaw tightened. "I told one person," he said, "because I needed someone to deliver it." She waited. "Lena," he said. The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. Isabella turned back to the window. "Then we know," she said. "We don't have proof," he said immediately. "Knowing and having proof are, I know what they are," she said. "I spent 4 years building proof in corporate crisis cases where everyone already knew who had done what, and nobody could move until the documentation existed. I know what the gap between knowing and proving looks like." She paused. "But I also know that proof is buildable if you know where to look. And now we know where to look." Adrian came to stand behind her, not touching her, just close. "This is what I meant," he said very quietly. "When I said I was afraid of how much you understand. Not because I don't trust you, because the more you understand, the more danger you're in." "I am already in danger," she said. "The only difference now is that I understand why." A long beat of silence. "What do you need?" he asked. She turned around. He was close, and she felt the familiar gravitational pull of him, the particular quality of his presence that had drawn her in from the beginning. She did not step back. "I need full access to the communication logs for the past 60 days, she said. "I need the access records for the 3 databases where my profile was flagged. And I need you to act normally with Lena for the next 48 hours. Business as usual, no indication that anything has changed." He looked at her for a long moment. "And I need you to not send anyone to watch my building tonight," she said. "Lena knows your protection patterns. If you change anything now, she will know that something has shifted." "Isabella, I know," she said. "I know what you want to say. But listen to what I'm asking. I am not asking you to leave me unprotected. I am asking you to let me manage the way that protection operates. Because right now, the most important thing we have is that the person who is doing this does not know that we know." He held her gaze for what felt like a very long time. "I'll get you the logs," he said finally. "Thank you. And Isabella," he paused. "I'll be out front, not inside, not visible, but out front." She looked at him. "Out front is fine," she said. He left at close to midnight. She stood at her window and watched the street below without turning on any lights, and after a few minutes, she saw the dark car pull to the curb half a block away and stay there, engine off, lights off, still as everything else. She went to bed. She did not sleep much, but what sleep she got was her own. The files arrived at 7 the next morning. Not through the unknown number this time. Through a secure transfer link that appeared in her professional email under a sender name she did not recognize, with a subject line that said simply, "Requested materials." She called Marcus at 7:15. "I need you on something off the books," she said. Marcus had worked with her for 3 years and knew that off the books meant he would not ask questions, and she would not give him context he didn't need. "When?" he said. "Now," she said. "Come to my apartment. Bring your own machine." He arrived at 8. She handed him the access logs and the database flagging records, and watched him work for the better part of 90 minutes while she went through the communication logs herself. She was looking for a pattern, not content. Pattern. The when and how of communication, the rhythms of timing and frequency, the way information moved through a network, revealed more about intent than the information itself. She had used this approach in corporate espionage cases twice before. It was painstaking, and it was definitive, and it was exactly what she needed right now. By 9:30 she had found it. There was a recurring communication signature in the logs that appeared 11 times over 60 days. It was not attributed to any named sender. It had been routed through a relay point she did not recognize. but the timing of each communication corresponded with an average lag of 4 to 6 hours to a subsequent movement or decision inside Adrian's organization. Someone had been feeding real-time intelligence, and the relay point, when Marcus ran it through his own systems, came back registered to a holding company with no visible ownership chain. "Can you trace the holding company?" she asked. "Give me an hour," he said. She gave him 45 minutes. When he looked up from his screen, his face was very careful. "What?" she said. "The holding company has one document of incorporation on file," he said. "The signatory is listed as L. Caruso." Isabella sat back. She had known. She had walked into this morning knowing. But hearing it stated as documented fact landed differently than knowing it as a conclusion. There was a particular quality of clarity that came with documentation that felt like a door closing. Not painfully, but finally. "All right," she said. "Isabella," Marcus said carefully, "this is not a corporate espionage case. I know what it is. Then you know that whatever you do with this information, the next step is not something you should take alone." She looked at the relay point data on his screen. Then she picked up her phone. She did not call the unknown number this time. She called Adrian's personal line directly from a number he would not have blocked because she had never used it before. A prepaid phone she kept for client emergencies. He picked up on the second ring. "It's me," she said. A pause. Then, "I know. We have documentation," she said. "Marcus found the incorporation record. The relay point traces back to a holding company in Lena's name." The silence on his end was different from the silence she was used to from him. This one had texture. It had the particular density of something that had been suspected and was now confirmed, and confirmation of a betrayal by someone trusted always landed in its own specific and irreversible way. "Send me the documentation," he said. "I will," she said. "But Adrian, before you do anything with this, I need to know that you are going to let me be part of what happens next. Not because I need to be in the room, because I understand the pattern of what Lena has been doing better than anyone right now, and you need that understanding." Another pause. "You'll be in the room," he said. She exhaled very slowly. "I'm sending it now," she said. She ended the call and looked at Marcus. "Thank you," she said. "Be careful," he said. "I will be," she said. And she meant it, which was different from the way she might have said it 6 months ago, when being careful was a courtesy reassurance she gave to people who worried about her. Now it was a commitment she was making to herself. She sent the documentation. An hour later, a car pulled up outside her building. Not one of the usual ones. Something quieter. She went downstairs because she had decided not to wait for things to come to her. The driver was a young man she did not recognize. He handed her an envelope through the window. Inside the envelope was a keycard, a physical address on the near west side, and a handwritten note in Adrian's handwriting that said, "Conference room. 3rd floor. Bring everything." She brought everything. The building on the near west side was not what she expected. No visible security presence. No markers. Just a brick building that looked like a small commercial property from the outside, and on the 3rd floor, a conference room that was clearly where Adrian's organization did its real thinking. Clean surfaces, good lighting, a long table, and 4 people already seated when she walked in. 3 of them she did not know. The 4th was Adrian. He looked at her when she came in, and something passed between them that was not a greeting, but was more than acknowledgement. Then he introduced the 3 people in the room as members of his inner circle, whose names she had heard, but whose faces she was seeing for the first time. "Isabella is going to walk us through what she found," he said. "And then we are going to make a decision together." The 3 men looked at her. She set her materials on the table. She talked for 30 minutes. She walked through the communication signature, the relay point, the timing correlations, the incorporation document. She was methodical and precise, and she did not soften anything. She presented it the way she presented corporate crisis findings to boards of directors who needed to make hard decisions with accurate information. When she finished, the room was quiet. One of the three men, older with gray at his temples, said, "How long have you been working on this?" "Since the day before yesterday," she said. He looked at Adrian. Adrian said nothing. The older man looked back at Isabella. "You did this in 2 days." "I had very good raw material," she said. "Whoever built the communication architecture inside your organization built it well. But the relay point was the weak link. Once I had the relay, the rest followed." Another silence. Then one of the other men said, "What do you recommend?" Isabella looked at him, then at Adrian. "I recommend that you do not move on Lena directly," she said. "Not yet. If you move now, you get one person. But the relay point has been active for 60 days, and the pattern of communications suggests that Moretti's network has been building toward something specific. If you move on Lena now, you stop whatever is coming, but you don't stop the next attempt. You need to let this play out one more step. You need to let Lena think that she is still trusted and still useful, and you need to position someone inside the specific operation Moretti is building, so that when it moves, you can see all of it." "You're suggesting we use her as bait," the gray-templed man said. "I'm suggesting you use the fact that she doesn't know, you know," Isabella said. "There's a difference. Bait implies she's the target. She's the mechanism. The target is whatever Moretti is actually planning." The room was quiet. Then Adrian said, "Who would you put inside the operation?" She looked at him. "Someone Moretti would find valuable enough to accept," she said. "Someone whose skills and access and profile make them an asset worth the risk of bringing in." A beat. "Not you," Adrian said, and his voice had gone very flat. "Not me," she agreed. "I'm not trained for operational work, but I know someone who is." She set a single sheet of paper on the table. Adrian looked at it. He looked at the name. She watched his expression. "You've already contacted this person," he said. It was not a question. "I made a preliminary inquiry," she said. "I did not make any commitment without bringing it to you first." He looked at her for a long moment. "You made a preliminary inquiry," he repeated slowly. "Yes," she said. "While you were sitting in your apartment with a black rose on your windowsill and my people parked outside." "The two things are not incompatible," she said. Something moved through his eyes. Not anger. Something more complicated than anger. "No," he said finally. "They're not." He picked up the paper and passed it to the gray-templed man, who read the name and looked up with an expression that suggested he recognized it and was mildly surprised. "She knows him," the gray-templed man said to Adrian. "She knows a great many people," Adrian said, and the way he said it landed somewhere between exasperation and something very close to pride. The meeting lasted another hour. By the time it ended, they had the outline of a plan. Not a complete plan. An outline. The kind that would require precise execution and significant trust, and a willingness to accept that some things could not be controlled in advance, only responded to. All of which, Isabella reflected, was also a reasonably accurate description of what she was trying to do with Adrian. He walked her out afterward. They stood on the sidewalk outside the building, and the city moved around them with complete indifference to the weight of what had just happened in that third-floor conference room. "You walked in there, and you ran that room," he said. "I presented findings," she said. "That's what I do." "You ran the room," he said again. And this time she did not argue. She looked at the street. "How long have you known about Lena?" she asked. A pause. "I had a suspicion," he said. "Not a conviction. A suspicion that something was wrong in the pattern of information leaks over the past 2 months. I did not want to believe it was her." "Because you trusted her. Because she has been with me for 4 years. And in my world, 4 years of loyalty is not a small thing." Isabella looked at him. "I understand that," she said. "Do you?" "I trusted you for 18 months, she said quietly. "Even when you made decisions I disagreed with, I trusted that the core of you was a man who was trying to do right by the people he cared about. That kind of trust does not come from nowhere. And when it breaks in a specific way. He looked at her for a long time. She knew about the rose, he said. She was the only person I told. I know. She could have used that information against you. I know that too. And you are still standing here. Yes, she said. Because knowing that someone tried to hurt me is different from letting them succeed. He was quiet. Then he said, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. When have I not? She said. He almost smiled. Almost. When you blocked me, he said. When you left. Was it because you stopped trusting me, or because you stopped trusting what being with me was doing to you? She considered that for a long time. She gave it the full weight it deserved. Both, she said finally. But more the second one. I did not stop trusting you, Adrian. I stopped trusting the person I was becoming when I accepted a version of this relationship that made your judgment more important than mine. He absorbed that. I sent you the rose, he said, because I could not find any other way to tell you that I understood what I had done. I know, she said. Do you believe it? She looked at the city. She looked at the black car still parked half a block away. She looked at her own hands. I believe that you meant it when you sent it, she said. I also believe that meaning something and being able to sustain it are different challenges, and I am not willing to come back to anything that reverts to what it was. I'm not asking you to come back to what it was. Then what are you asking? He looked at her directly. I am asking, he said carefully, whether what we just did in that room, you and me with full information, making decisions together, whether that is something you can see becoming a pattern. She looked at him. That depends on whether it stays like that when things get harder, she said. Because that room was a good day. What we found confirmed what I suspected. The plan is solid. Everyone agreed. Good days are easy, Adrian. The test is what happens on the days when you are afraid for me and every instinct you have tells you to shut me out. I know, he said. Do you? I am beginning to, he said. That is an honest answer. Not a complete one, but an honest one. She considered him for a moment. Then she said, the person on that paper, he will need to be in place within 4 days if the timing is going to work. I need you to coordinate that without routing it through any channel Lena has access to. I know how to do that. I know you do, she said. I'll be in contact tomorrow. She started to walk away. Isabella. She stopped. Thank you, he said, for coming back, for bringing what you found, for being in that room. She stood with her back to him for a moment. Don't thank me, she said. Work with me. She kept walking. She heard him behind her, not following, just present the way he was always present, even when he was nowhere you could see him, and she did not look back. But she was already thinking about tomorrow, already mapping the next steps, already running the timing on the operation in her head, the 4-day window, the variables that could go wrong, the ones she could control, and the ones she could not. Already thinking about Lena Caruso, sitting in whatever office she sat in every morning, going through the motions of loyalty, while the relay point hummed quietly in the background. Already thinking about what it would feel like when that relay went silent. Not with satisfaction, with something more complicated. The kind of clarity that comes after a long fever breaks, and you are left standing in the aftermath of your own survival, a little unsteady and very awake. She had walked out of his mansion 4 days ago, with nothing but her coat and her leather folder, and the weight of a decision she was not certain would hold. She was still standing. That counted for something. She got home and went directly to the kitchen and looked at the black rose on the windowsill. 5 days now, and it had not wilted. Not one petal had dropped. She did not know how that was possible, and she also did not question it, because sometimes things held longer than you expected, and the only honest response to that was to notice it. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table with her notepad and started mapping the 48 hours that followed the meeting. Not because she needed to write it down, because writing made the shape of a problem visible in a way that pure thought sometimes did not. The relay point, The 4-day window. The name on the paper. Lena still trusted, still operational, still believing she was invisible. Her phone buzzed. The unknown number. She had almost forgotten about the unknown number. Over the past 2 days, it had become so consistent a presence that she had stopped thinking of it as anonymous. The message said, "He told me what happened in the room today. He wanted me to tell you something, but he didn't know how to say it himself, so he asked me to send it." She typed back, "What did he want to say?" The reply came in under a minute. He said, "She did in 2 days what my people couldn't do in 2 months." And then he sat in his car for 20 minutes before he drove away. Isabella looked at the message for a long time. Then she typed, "Tell him I said that's because his people were looking for confirmation of what they suspected. I was looking for the truth." She set the phone down. She looked at the rose. She thought about Lena Caruso, who had handled a black rose with careful hands, and known exactly what it meant, and chosen to use that knowledge as a weapon. She thought about the difference between people who understood love and people who merely recognized its mechanisms. She thought about the 4-day window and the name on the paper and the outline of a plan that was already beginning to pull toward its own gravity. And she thought about Adrian Valenti sitting in a dark car on a quiet street, not following her, not controlling her, just present. The way people were present when they finally understood that being close to someone did not mean occupying all of their space. Her phone buzzed one more time. The message said, "He also said she was right about the good days being easy. He's thinking about the hard ones." She looked at the message for a long time. Then she typed back a single word, "Good." She closed the phone and went back to her notepad and kept working. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary night. And somewhere in it, a relay point was still active, still humming, still feeding information to people who did not yet know that the woman they had decided to use as a weapon had already turned around and aimed it back. The name on the paper was Daniel Reyes. Isabella had met Daniel 3 years earlier through a corporate security consultation that had gone sideways in the best possible way. The kind of case where the problem turned out to be far more complicated than anyone had originally disclosed, and the only reason it resolved without catastrophic damage was because both of them had been willing to follow the thread past the point where most professionals would have stopped and called it someone else's problem. Daniel was former DEA, 2 years out now, running private intelligence work for clients who needed someone who could move through difficult environments without leaving the kind of footprints that attracted attention. He was disciplined, precise, and possessed the particular kind of calm that came not from an absence of fear, but from a long practiced relationship with it. More importantly, he had history with Moretti's network, not as an associate, as someone who had spent 18 months mapping it from the inside for a federal operation that had ultimately been shut down for political reasons that had nothing to do with the quality of his work. He knew how they thought. He knew what they valued. He knew how they vetted new people and what it took to be found useful rather than suspicious, which made him, in Isabella's assessment, the only person she knew who could walk into whatever Moretti was building and come back out with something actionable. She had called him at 7 in the morning, the day after the meeting, before she had even spoken to Adrian, because she understood that the right person for this had to be identified before the plan could be built around them and not the other way around. Daniel had listened to her preliminary outline without interruption. Then he had said, "You know what you're asking me to walk into." "I know," she had said. "And you know who you're working with." "Yes." "Does he know you called me before you cleared it with him?" She had paused. "He knows now." Daniel had made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You haven't changed." "Neither have you," she had said. "Are you in? Tell me the 4-day window and give me the relay point data," he had said. "And I'll tell you in the morning." He had called at 6 the next morning and said yes. Now it was day 2 of the 4-day window, and Isabella was sitting across from Adrian in the same third-floor conference room this time, without the 3 gray-templed men, just the 2 of them, and a secured laptop and a map of what Daniel had already found in his first 14 hours inside Moretti's peripheral network. It was more than she had expected. "He's fast," Adrian said, looking at the screen. "He's careful," Isabella corrected. "There's a difference. Fast implies improvisation. What Daniel does looks fast because the preparation is invisible." Adrian looked at her sideways. "You trust him," he said. "Professionally?" she said. "Completely." A pause that had a specific texture. "All right," he said, and moved on. What Daniel had found in 14 hours was the outline of an operation that was not, as they had initially suspected, primarily aimed at Adrian's financial infrastructure. It was aimed at something far more personal. Moretti was not trying to destroy Adrian's empire. He was trying to take it, and the mechanism he had chosen was not a direct attack. It was a reputational operation, a systematic effort to surface information real and fabricated in careful proportion that would trigger investigations from 3 separate federal agencies, simultaneously creating enough legal exposure and public scrutiny that Adrian's key allies would have no choice but to distance themselves, leaving the organization vulnerable to a hostile absorption from the outside. It was sophisticated, it was patient, and it had been in construction for 8 months. 8 months, Adrian said quietly when Isabella finished walking him through Daniel's preliminary report. "Lena has been feeding them for at least 60 days, Isabella said. "But the architecture of the operation is older. Someone with a longer view built this." "Moretti doesn't build like this," Adrian said. "No," she agreed. "He doesn't." They looked at each other across the table. "So someone built it for him," Adrian said. "Or someone is using Moretti as the visible instrument of an operation they don't want their name on," Isabella said. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes a significant recalibration. Who has the resources to build something like this and the motive to want your organization absorbed rather than destroyed? She asked. Adrian leaned back in his chair. She watched him think. She had learned over 18 months to read the quality of his silences, and this one was different from the controlled stillness he used as a professional tool. This one was genuine and a little unwilling. The way people were unwilling when the answer to a question was someone they did not want it to be. "Say it," she said. "Vincent Caro," he said. She did not know the name. "He's not in my world," Adrian said before she could ask. "He operates in legitimate finance, private equity, commercial real estate, several significant political connections. On paper, he is entirely clean. And off paper, he has been trying to establish a position in Chicago's underground economy for 4 years. Every attempt has failed, because every attempt required going through me. So taking your organization is not collateral damage," she said. "It's the objective." "It was always the objective," Adrian said. "Moretti is just the tool." Isabella sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Does Lena know Caro?" Adrian went very still. She watched him reach into the space between what he knew and what he had not yet let himself believe. "Adrian," she said, "does Lena have a connection to Caro?" "She worked for him," he said. "Before she came to me. 4.5 years ago. I knew that. I vetted it. She left his organization under circumstances that looked like a conflict over compensation, and I believed it because her performance for me was exceptional from the first week." "She was placed," Isabella said quietly. He did not answer immediately. She gave him the time. "She was placed," he said finally. Not a question, not an argument. Just the weight of a conclusion that could not be undone once it was stated. 4.5 years, Isabella said. The loyalty that made you trust her was engineered from the beginning. She watched the impact of that move through him. She was not clinical about it. She understood what it felt like to learn that something you had invested trust in had been constructed specifically to receive that trust. It was not just betrayal. It was a specific kind of violation that made you question every judgment you had made in the interval. "This changes the scope," he said. "Yes," she said. This is not an internal discipline problem, he said. This is a 4-year deep cover operation funded by someone with significant resources and clean hands and very specific ambitions. Yes. And I am now in a position where my most sensitive internal communications person has been actively working against me for at minimum 60 days, and potentially for the full 4 years of her tenure. Yes, Isabella said. Which means we cannot assume the integrity of any communication channel she has ever had access to. He stood up from the table. She let him stand. She let him walk to the other side of the room and stand there with his back to her for a moment because she understood that this was not a moment for pressure. This was a moment for the specific kind of stillness that comes before someone decides who they are going to be in the middle of something that has just gotten significantly larger and more serious than anyone had prepared for. He turned around. "What do we need?" he said. She had been ready for that question. "We need Daniel to stay in place," she said. "He has to be the only pipeline that Moretti and Caro can't see. Everything we move from this point forward runs through Daniel." She paused. "We also need to give Lena something to feed them. Something real enough to be credible and structured enough to move their operation in a direction we can anticipate." "You want to feed disinformation through an active intelligence asset," he said. "I want to control the narrative they're building," she said. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "Do you know what happens to the person running the disinformation if the other side identifies the deception?" he said. "I do," she said. "And you are suggesting we put Daniel in that position." "Daniel understands the risk," she said. "He accepted it when he accepted the job." "I'm not asking about Daniel," he said. "I'm asking about you. Because this operation has your name attached to it, Isabella. You built the framework. You identified the target. If Caro's people trace the disinformation back to its source, they will not stop at Daniel." She held his gaze. "I know that," she said. And I made a decision about my own risk," she said. "That is mine to make, not yours." He said nothing. She kept going. "The disinformation needs to be something that accelerates their timeline. Caro has been patient for 8 months. If we give him something that looks like a sudden vulnerability in your infrastructure, something that suggests the window for a clean operation is closing fast, he will move before he's fully ready, and that is when operations make mistakes." "What kind of vulnerability?" "A financial one," she said. "Something that suggests your primary capital reserve is being investigated by a federal agency for source irregularities. Nothing specific enough to be verifiable quickly, but credible enough that Caro's financial instincts tell him to move now or lose the opportunity." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "That kind of information, if Lena feeds it to Moretti, will reach Caro within 6 hours, he said. "And Caro will want to verify before he moves." "That's correct," she said. "Which is why Daniel needs to be in position to provide the verification, not fabricate it. Confirm it through channels Caro trusts." "You've already talked to Daniel about this," he said. "This morning," she said. "Before I came here." He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to understand was his version of being genuinely caught off guard. "You planned the entire second phase before you walked in here," he said. "I planned the outline," she said. "I needed you for the details because the financial structure has to be something your organization can credibly explain later without creating actual legal exposure." He almost laughed. She watched him stop himself. "All right," he said, and sat back down. They worked for 3 hours. It was the most direct and sustained collaboration they had ever engaged in, and Isabella was aware of that as it was happening, aware of the way he deferred to her on the behavioral and structural elements of the disinformation, the way she deferred to him on the organizational and financial specifics, the way neither of them was performing for the other, but simply moving through the problem with the efficiency that comes from two people who are genuinely functionally suited to working together. By noon, they had the shape of something real. They ordered food. Actual food from a place 2 blocks away, delivered without ceremony to the conference room table, and ate while they went through the final details. And Isabella was aware that this too was different, that eating lunch across a conference table over an active intelligence operation was so far from the careful, constructed version of their relationship that had existed 6 weeks ago that it might as well have been a different life. "The trigger," she said between bites. "Lena needs a reason to report this immediately rather than sitting on it." What would make her move fast? Adrian thought. "If she believes I'm becoming suspicious," he said. "If something in my behavior suggests I'm tightening the circle." So we give her that. How? "You cut her out of one meeting," Isabella said. "Not dramatically, bureaucratically, something she would normally be included in. You routed around her with a plausible operational reason. She will not be certain it's about her. But uncertainty in an active intelligence asset produces exactly the behavior we want she reports immediately before she loses access." He nodded slowly. "The meeting tomorrow morning," he said. "She runs the communication setup for it. If I route it through Marco instead." "Marco is still on the list," Isabella said. "Marco is clean," he said. "I've known that since last night. The access pattern you identified clears him. The timing on 3 of the communications corresponds to periods when Marco was verifiably in transit without network access." He paused. "I had my people run the analysis independently after you sent the relay data." She looked at him. "You verified my work," she said. "I verified the conclusion," he said. "That is not the same thing as doubting your work." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "All right, Marco runs the meeting. Lena gets routed around it with a procedural explanation. She reports within the hour." "And then," he said, "and then Daniel confirms the disinformation through Moretti's verification channel, and Caro makes his move," she said. "And when he moves, we are already inside the operation." He looked at her across the conference table, with the remnants of lunch between them and the secured laptop open to Daniel's preliminary report, and the outline of a plan that had evolved from a single relay point and a notepad in her kitchen into something that was now operating on a scale she had not entirely anticipated when she first typed those 3 names. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "When this is over," he said, "when Caro's operation collapses and Lena is dealt with, and Daniel is out, and the relay point is dead, what do you want?" She looked at him. "I want to not have to answer that question under these conditions," she said. "I want to answer it when neither of us is in the middle of something where the answer could be influenced by adrenaline and proximity and the particular emotional gravity of doing difficult things together." He was quiet. "That's a fair answer," he said. "It's an honest one," she said, "which is what you asked for." He nodded. He closed the laptop. 48 hours, he said. 48 hours. She agreed. She left the building at 2 in the afternoon and took a different route home than she normally would not, because she was following a security protocol someone had given her, but because she had learned over the past 4 days to vary her patterns independently. She did not need to be told. She understood the logic of it, and she applied it herself, which was the only way she was willing to apply it. Her phone buzzed at 3:15. "Daniel." She answered. "I'm in," he said. "Not hello, just that." "How far?" she said. "Far enough that I was in the same room as 2 of Moretti's senior people this morning, and they were not careful about what they said in front of me," he said. "They're ready to move. Whatever Caro told them, they believe the window is now." "The disinformation hasn't gone in yet," she said. "I know," he said, "which means the original timeline was already accelerating before we pushed it. Something else triggered this." She stopped walking. "What kind of something else?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said. "But Isabella, they talked about you by name." Her blood went cold. "What did they say?" she said. "They said the woman was the variable," he said. "They said as long as she's outside his protection and inside the operation, the plan holds. The moment she goes back in fully, in meaning he stops operating independently and starts operating with her, the leverage disappears." She stood very still on the sidewalk. "They're counting on him keeping me at a distance," she said. "They built the entire operation on that assumption," Daniel said. "If Valenti works alone, he is isolated. If he brings you in as a full partner, you're a multiplier, not a liability. They know that, which is why they wanted you visible and exposed and separate from him." She thought about the black rose. She thought about the fight in the office. She thought about the moment she had blocked every number and walked out. She thought about Lena Caruso, who had known all of it. "The fight," she said slowly. "Our fight. Lena knew about it." "Within hours, based on the communication pattern," Daniel said. "Whatever Moretti's people were building, they accelerated it the day after you left his house." She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. "Daniel," she said, "how quickly can you be in position if the trigger goes in tonight instead of tomorrow?" A pause. "I'd need 4 hours," he said. "You have 3, she said. "I'll let you know when the trigger is set." She ended the call and immediately dialed Adrian. He picked up in one ring. "I need you to listen carefully," she said, "and I need you to trust what I'm about to tell you." "I'm listening," he said. She told him everything Daniel had said. She gave it to him straight, no softening, because she had learned that Adrian processed information better when it was precise than when it was managed, and because she was done managing what he could handle. When she finished, the silence on his end lasted longer than usual. Then he said, "They built the entire operation around the assumption that I would keep you outside." "Yes," she said. "And they accelerated when you left." "Yes. They thought losing you was a vulnerability," he said. "They thought I would be—" He stopped. "Emotionally compromised," she said. "Less clear, more reactive." "Were they wrong?" he said, and the honesty in it was the kind that cost something. "In the beginning," she said quietly. "Maybe not entirely, but that is not where you are now." He was quiet. "Send the trigger tonight," she said. "Move the meeting route around Lena, let her report. Give Daniel the 3 hours. I'll make the call to Marco in the next 20 minutes, he said. "And Adrian." She paused. "Whatever Lena reports to Moretti about the disinformation, it needs to be something she genuinely believes, which means you need to behave like a man whose financial infrastructure is under real pressure. For the next 48 hours, she needs to look at you and believe she is watching someone who is holding on." A long pause. "That is a more personal ask than the others," he said. "I know," she said. "Can you do it?" "Yes," he said. And then, "Only because you'll know I'm performing." She did not know exactly what to do with that. So she said, "That's enough. Go make the call." She got home at 4. The rose was still on the windowsill. 6 days. Still holding. She changed out of her work clothes and stood in the kitchen and thought about Lena Caruso, who had been placed inside Adrian's world 4.5 years ago with a specific purpose, and who had spent those 4.5 years earning trust and building access and waiting with tremendous patience for the architecture around her to mature into something usable. She thought about what it took to do that. The sustained commitment to a role. The daily discipline of performing loyalty while maintaining a separate and parallel allegiance. She thought about the conversation where Adrian had told Lena about the rose. The specific choice to share that with someone he trusted in a moment when he was searching for a way to reach across the distance Isabella had put between them. And Lena had taken that information and routed it directly to the people who were building a case for destroying him. Isabella felt something she did not usually feel in professional contexts. Not anger exactly. Something more precise than anger. The particular cold clarity that came when someone used love as an instrument of harm, and she could see exactly how they had done it. Her phone buzzed at 5:40. Daniel trigger received. Moving now. Then, 4 minutes later, from the unknown number. She reported. 40 minutes after Marco's call. "You were right about the timing." She typed back. "Is he holding?" The reply, "He's holding. He looks like someone carrying something heavy. It's very convincing." She stood in her kitchen with her phone in her hand and thought about what it meant that Adrian Valenti, who had spent his entire adult life being the most controlled person in any room, was now deliberately performing vulnerability so that a woman who had betrayed him could believe it and carry that belief to the people who had placed her. She typed, "Tell him he's doing well." The reply came fast. "He said to tell you he knows because you told him so." She almost smiled. Her phone rang at 7. "Marcus. You need to see something," he said. "Send it." "I can't send it," he said. "You need to see it in person." 40 minutes later, she was in Marcus's office, and he was showing her something on his screen that she had not anticipated, and that changed the shape of everything she thought she understood about the operation they were running. The holding company that owned the relay point was not Lena's only asset. There was a second company, also in Lena's name, also dormant, but active for 8 months, not 60 days. And its sole registered address was a property in the West Loop that, when Marcus pulled the ownership records, came back as held in trust under a name Isabella recognized immediately. Not Caro, not Moretti. A name she had seen once in a file Adrian had shown her 8 months ago when he was explaining the structure of a long-standing alliance that he had described as foundational to his organization's stability. A name she had never questioned because it had come from Adrian himself, presented as something safe. Her hands went still on the desk. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah," he said. "How long has this company been active?" 8 months, he said. To the week. 8 months ago, Adrian had shown her that file. 8 months ago, the secondary company had gone active. 8 months ago, the operation they were now running to dismantle had been set in motion. She thought about what Daniel had said. Someone with a longer view built this. She thought about the name in the ownership record. She thought about all the ways that the most sophisticated deceptions were built, not around the people you didn't trust, but around the ones you did. "I need to make a call," she said. "Isabella." Marcus's voice was careful, very careful. "Whoever you call about this, you need to be certain." "I know," she said. She looked at the screen. She thought about the rose. She thought about the thorns that had been removed. She thought about the man who had sent it, and what it had cost him, and what it had meant. She thought about what it would mean if the person she was beginning to let back in was connected even distantly, even unknowingly, to the name on that screen. She picked up her phone. She did not call Adrian. She called Daniel. "I need you to find something for me," she said when he answered. "Right now, tonight, before anything else moves." "What am I looking for?" he said. She told him the name. There was a silence on his end that was longer than any silence Daniel Reyes had produced in their entire professional relationship. "Where did you find that name?" he said. "In a property ownership record connected to the secondary company," she said. "Marcus found it 20 minutes ago." "Isabella," Daniel said. "I know that name." "Tell me," she said. "That name," he said slowly, "came up once in my federal investigation, 18 months inside Moretti's network. It came up once, in a context that suggested a relationship that was older than anything I had been briefed on." She closed her eyes. "How old?" she said. "Old enough," he said, "that it predates Caro, predates Moretti's current operation. Old enough that whoever this person is, they have been present in the background of this ecosystem for a very long time." She opened her eyes. "Are you telling me," she said carefully, "that the person whose name is in this ownership record is not a piece of Caro's operation?" "I'm telling you," Daniel said, "that based on what I saw 18 months ago, Caro might be a piece of their operation." The room was very quiet. She looked at Marcus, who was watching her with the expression of someone who understood that they were in the presence of information that was about to require decisions they had not prepared for. "Stay in position," she said to Daniel. "Do not move on anything. I will call you back in 1 hour." "Isabella." 1 hour, she said. "I need to think." She ended the call. She stood in Marcus's office and looked at the name on the screen and understood that the operation she had spent 4 days building was still the right operation, but the map underneath it had just revealed a layer that nobody had known was there. And the most important question she had to answer in the next hour was not operational. It was personal. She needed to decide whether to tell Adrian what she had found. Not because she doubted him. She did not doubt him. But because the name on that screen was someone Adrian trusted, and telling him meant watching him absorb a second and more devastating betrayal in the space of 4 days. And doing that to someone in the middle of a high-stakes operation was a risk in itself. But not telling him was the thing he had done to her. The thing she had walked out over. The thing the black rose had been an apology for. She picked up her phone. She called him. He answered in one ring. "I found something," she said. "And I am telling you right now before I decide what it means or what we do about it, because that is what we agreed on." "Tell me," he said. She told him. And for the first time since she had met Adrian Valenti, she heard something in his voice that she had never heard before. Not anger, not control, not the cold stillness of a man making a calculation. Something raw, something that sounded beneath all the composure, like the specific shock of a man who had just learned that the ground he thought he was standing on had been hollow for a very long time. She let him feel it. She did not fill the silence. She waited. And when he finally spoke, what he said was not what she expected. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That was all, but it was everything." The name on the screen was Thomas Vane. Adrian had said it out loud after Isabella told him just once quietly, "The way you say something, when part of you is still hoping that saying it will reveal it to be a mistake. Like the sound of it in your own voice might produce a different result than the one sitting in front of you on a property ownership record that Marcus had pulled from a database that did not lie." Thomas Vane had been Adrian's father's attorney. He had managed the legal architecture of the Valenti organization through 2 decades of structural change, 3 federal investigations that had gone nowhere, and the transition of power when Adrian's father died 7 years ago. He was 64 years old, impeccably credentialed, publicly respected, and had attended Adrian's father's funeral in the front row, standing beside Adrian, with one hand on his shoulder. He had been present at the beginning of everything, which meant he had been positioned to undermine it from the beginning too. Isabella did not say any of that on the phone. She gave Adrian the facts. The secondary company, the property record, the ownership trust. Daniel's confirmation that the name had surfaced once during his federal investigation, in a context that suggested a relationship far older than Caro or Moretti, and then she waited. His silence lasted nearly 2 full minutes. She counted them. When he finally spoke, he said thank you, and then he said he needed an hour, and she said take what you need, and he ended the call. She sat in Marcus's office and looked at the name on the screen and thought about what it meant to build a life on a foundation that someone had been quietly compromising for longer than you had been in charge of it. Marcus said, "Do you want me to keep pulling on this?" "Yes," she said. "Everything you can find on the secondary company and on any financial relationship between Vane's Trust and Caro's known entities. But Marcus, keep this completely off any system that has ever touched anything in Adrian's network." "Understood," he said. She left at 9 and took a cab rather than walking, because she was thinking too hard to navigate safely, and she knew it. She sat in the back of the cab and let the city move past the windows and ran the new shape of the operation through her mind. Everything she had built over the past 4 days was still valid. The relay point, Lena, the disinformation, Daniel's position inside Moretti's network, all of it still held. But the target had shifted. They were not dismantling a hostile takeover engineered by a man named Vincent Caro. They were dismantling a 40-year architecture constructed by a man who had been present at the founding of everything Adrian had inherited, and who had at some point in those 40 years decided that his position as trusted counsel gave him the right to determine the organization's future rather than serve it. The question was, when? When had Thomas Vane decided to stop serving and start extracting? And the question underneath that one, the one Isabella was not ready to ask out loud yet, was whether Adrian's father had known. She got home at 9:30. The rose was on the windowsill, 7 days, still alive. She stood in front of it for a long moment. Then her phone rang. Not the unknown number. Not Daniel. Adrian's actual voice calling from a number she had unblocked 3 days ago without making a ceremony of it. "I'm outside," he said. She buzzed him in without answering. He came through the door, and he looked different than he had in the conference room that afternoon. Not broken. Nothing about Adrian Valenti was broken. But the particular quality of composed control that he wore as naturally as other men wore a jacket was thinner tonight, more deliberately maintained, and she could see the effort of it in the set of his jaw. She did not offer tea this time. She sat down at the kitchen table, and he sat across from her, and they looked at each other, and she let him begin. "My father trusted Thomas Vane completely," he said. "Not as an attorney, as family. There was a period when I was about 14 when Vane was at our house more evenings than not. My father used to say that Thomas was the only man in his life who had never wanted anything from him. He meant it as the highest possible praise." "How long ago did your father say that?" Isabella asked. 30 years, Adrian said, give or take. "And in 30 years, she said carefully, did the nature of Vane's involvement in the organization change?" "It evolved," Adrian said. "When I took over, Vane's role shifted from legal counsel to something more structural. He maintained the financial architecture at a level that nobody else had visibility into. Not because I excluded others, because he was the one who built it. He was the only one who fully understood it." "He made himself irreplaceable," she said. Adrian looked at her. "Yes," he said. And she could hear underneath that single word the specific sound of a man who was reassessing 7 years of decisions through the lens of information he had not possessed when he made them. "What does Vane know?" she asked. "Specifically." "Everything," he said. "The reserve accounts, the holding structure, the relationships between the legitimate business interests and the operating network. The names of every silent partner and the terms of every arrangement that has been in place since my father's time. So if someone wanted to expose enough of that to trigger simultaneous federal investigations." She said, "Vane is not just a useful resource, he is the only resource. Without Vane's cooperation," Adrian said, "Caro's operation has no material. The disinformation we planted can accelerate their timeline, but the foundation of what they were planning to use against me, every piece of genuine intelligence that made the fabricated material credible, came from Vane." Isabella sat with that for a moment. "Which means Lena has been the operational courier," she said. "But Vane has been the source." "Yes. And Caro has been the vehicle," she said. "But Vane is the architect." "Yes," Adrian said. "And I did not see it." She looked at him across the table. She looked at the particular kind of quiet that had settled over him, not defeat, but the weight of something that demanded to be fully acknowledged before it could be moved past. "Nobody sees it when it's someone they grew up trusting," she said. "That is not a failure of intelligence. That is a condition of being human. In my world," he said, "being human is expensive." "In every world," she said. "The difference is that in yours, the cost is more immediate." He looked at his hands on the table. "I need to move on Vane before he knows that we know," he said. "The disinformation we sent through Lena will reach Moretti tonight. Caro will have it by morning. Vane will know by tomorrow afternoon at the latest, because Caro will want validation from his source before he commits to the acceleration." "How much time does that give us?" she said. 18 hours, he said. "Maybe 20. "It's enough," she said. "Is it?" he said. "It has to be," she said. "Which means we decide what we're doing with those hours right now." He looked at her. "Walk me through it," he said. She had been building it in her head since the cab ride home. "We need 2 things to happen simultaneously," she said. "First, Daniel has to be in position inside Moretti's operation when Caro makes his move. Not to stop it, to document it. We need the chain of command fully visible. Caro instructing Moretti based on intelligence from Vane routed through Lena. That chain documented in real time is what makes this prosecutable. And second," he said. "Second," she said, "we need Vane to produce the documentation himself." Adrian went very still. "Explain," he said. Vane has spent 40 years protecting himself by being the only person who fully understood the architecture he built, she said. Which means every sensitive document, every record, every piece of evidence that could expose either him or your organization lives in systems that only he can access and interpret. Yes, we need him to access those systems, she said, tomorrow morning, voluntarily, under the belief that he is serving the operation he's been running for the past 8 months. How do we make him believe that? You call him tonight, she said. Not about Vane, about something else. Something that requires his specific expertise that gives him a legitimate reason to be in his own systems first thing tomorrow morning. And while he is in those systems, Marcus intercepts the access log, and we capture every file he touches. Adrian was quiet for a moment. He will suspect nothing, he said slowly, if the call tonight is routine. Can you make it routine? She said. He held her gaze. Thomas Vane has known me since I was 12 years old, he said. I can make it routine. She believed him, not because she did not understand what that required. She understood exactly what it required. It required Adrian to call a man who had sat in the front row at his father's funeral, and who had spent the last unknown number of years building the mechanism for his destruction, and to speak to him in the voice of someone who had no knowledge of any of it. It required a performance more demanding than anything she had asked of him in the past 4 days, including performing vulnerability in front of Lena. I'll be here while you make the call, she said. Not to listen, just, I know, he said. Thank you. He took out his phone. He dialed. She watched him transform. It was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic, a shift in the quality of his presence, the particular ease that came from decades of practiced relationship. When Vane answered, Adrian's voice was exactly what it always was. Warm, measured, carrying the specific tone of a man calling someone he trusted about something that required attention but not urgency. He told Vane there was a question about the structure of one of the older holding arrangements that had come up in a routine review. Nothing pressing. But he wanted Thomas's eyes on the original documentation first thing tomorrow before the weekly briefing, just to make sure the framework was solid. Vane said, of course. Vane said he would pull the files in the morning. Vane said to give his regards to no one in particular, and ended the call with the warm, unhurried ease of a man who did not know that the conversation he had just had was the last normal one he would have for a very long time. Adrian set the phone down on the table. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, he sounded exactly the same. He would, she said. I've been calling that man for 7 years, he said. Every time something was uncertain. Every time I needed someone who understood the full picture. He paused. He was always available, always calm, always had the right answer. Because he knew every question before you asked it, she said quietly. He absorbed that. Yes, he said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not as a gesture of romance, as a gesture of simple human acknowledgement, the kind that says, I am here and I understand, and you do not have to carry the full weight of this alone in this particular moment. He looked at her hand. Then he turned his hand over and held hers. They stayed like that for a moment. Then she said, Marcus needs to be briefed tonight. I'll call him now. He needs the access monitoring in place before Vane opens his system tomorrow morning. I'll send you the technical architecture, he said. The specific access points Thomas uses. Marcus will need them. Send it in the next 20 minutes, she said. He nodded. She pulled her hand back and picked up her phone and called Marcus. Marcus, to his credit, did not complain about being called at 10:30 on a night that had already been significantly longer than either of them had planned for. He said, give me the architecture and I'll have the intercept in place by 6. She said thank you. She meant it deeply. After she ended the call, Adrian was looking at the rose on the windowsill. 8 days, he said. 8 days, she confirmed. I didn't know if it would hold that long, he said, when I sent it. The variety I used, they're not known for longevity. She looked at the rose. What made you choose that one? She said. Because everything else felt like a statement, he said. The black rose felt like a question. She looked at him. It felt like, "Are you still there?" he said. "Not come back. Just, are you still there?" She held that for a moment. "I was still there," she said. "I know," he said. "I just didn't know if I deserved to find out." She did not answer immediately, not because she did not have an answer, but because she wanted to give it the weight it deserved, rather than offering it reflexively. "Deserving has never been the question between us," she said finally. "The question has always been whether we are willing to do the work of being honest with each other about what this actually is. The real version. Not the version where you protect me from difficult information because you think that's love. The real version. And this," he said, meaning the past 4 days, meaning the conference room, and the notepad and Daniel and Marcus and the name on the ownership record. "Is this the real version?" She looked at him. "This is closer," she said. He nodded slowly. He left at 11:15. She stood at the window again without the lights on and watched the dark car stop half a block away. And this time she did not have the same feeling she'd had the first night, the feeling of being observed. This time it felt like something else. Something she was not yet ready to name, but that she recognized, in the way you recognize a city you've visited before. Something familiar, even if the streets are still slightly uncertain. She slept better that night than she had in 10 days. Marcus called at 6:14. "We're in position," he said. "How long before Vane accesses the system?" she said. "He logged on 4 minutes ago," Marcus said. "He's moving through the holding structure files exactly the way you said he would. I'm capturing everything in real time." She sat up. "How much is there?" she said. "Isabella," Marcus said, and his voice had the particular quality it got when he was looking at something that was larger than the container he had prepared for it. "There are 43 years of documentation in these files. The original architecture goes back further than Adrian's father's active period. There are records here that predate the current organization by a decade. Vane was building this before the Valentis were who they became," she said. "It looks that way," Marcus said. "Pull everything," she said. "Do not let a single file go without capture." "Already running," he said. "But Isabella he's going to notice eventually. The access log doesn't show the intercept, but the volume of what he's touching is—" "How long?" she said. "He's thorough," Marcus said. "Based on his access pattern, I'd say 2 hours, maybe 2.5. "That's enough," she said. "Call me the moment he closes the session." She called Daniel at 6:30. "Where are you?" she said. "Inside," he said. "Moretti's people got the confirmation from Caro at midnight. They're moving. Isabella, they're moving today." "How soon?" she said. "The first contact with the federal agency is scheduled for 10 this morning," he said. "Someone inside the agency, and yes, there is someone inside, Moretti's people mentioned it without naming names, is going to receive a package of documentation that is supposed to trigger a preliminary inquiry within 24 hours. "Is Caro's name on the package?" she said. "No," Daniel said. "That's the elegance of it. The package will look like it came from an anonymous whistleblower inside your organization. The document trail leads back to Adrian, not to Caro. Caro's name appears nowhere." "And Vane?" she said. "Vane is the one who assembled the package," Daniel said. "But the assembly happened months ago. His fingerprints on it are old enough that by the time anyone looked, he'd have plausible deniability." "Not anymore," she said. "Marcus has the access logs, including this morning's session where Vane touched every file in the holding structure." "That connects him to the content," Daniel said. "That connects him to the content," she confirmed. "What we need from you is the delivery chain. The moment between when the package leaves Moretti's people and when it reaches the contact inside the agency. If we can document that handoff, I can document the handoff," he said. "I'm going to be in the room." She stopped. "Daniel," she said. "I know," he said. "But I'm the only one who can be there, and it's the only moment where the entire chain is visible and audible in one place. If I'm in that room, we get all of it." The silence on her end lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Tell Valenti," he said. Because if something goes sideways, I need his people to know where I am and what I'm doing. I need a recovery protocol. I'll call him now, she said. And Isabella. Daniel paused. You built something real here. Whatever happens in that room this morning, what you built over the past 4 days, this is good work. I need you to know that. Come back out and tell me that yourself, she said. Plan to, he said. She ended the call and immediately dialed Adrian. He answered before the first ring completed. Daniel is going in for the handoff, she said. He needs a recovery protocol. He needs your people to know his location and to be positioned to extract if the situation breaks. Where is he? Adrian said, and his voice had shifted into the register she associated with him operating at full capacity, the particular frequency of someone who was not afraid, but was absolutely and completely awake. She gave him Daniel's last known location. She heard him moving, heard the background quality of whatever space he was in change as he walked. I have 4 people within 6 blocks, he said. I'm repositioning them now. Adrian, she said. Yes. Vane closes his session in roughly 2 hours. When Marcus has the capture complete, we need to move on Vane before he realizes what Moretti's people are doing. The moment that package is in transit, Vane will know the operation is live, and if he suspects anything has gone wrong, he will destroy every physical record he controls. I know, he said. I'm going to Vane's office. She paused. Yourself, she said. Myself, he said. He needs to see me walk in, not my people. Me. If he sees my face before he has any reason to be afraid, he will not have time to shift into self-protection mode. And when he sees your face, she said, what are you going to say? A pause. I'm going to tell him the truth, he said. That I know. And that what happens next depends entirely on how honest he is in the next 10 minutes. Is that a strategy? She said. It's the only approach that works with Thomas, he said. He has spent 40 years being the smartest person in every room. Confronting him with evidence he cannot immediately assess gives him something to calculate, but confronting him with the truth leaves him nothing to work with. She thought about that. It's a risk, she said. Everything today is a risk, he said. But I know Thomas Vane. I have known him since I was 12, and the one thing that will crack that composure is looking at a person he genuinely cared about. Whatever else he did care about my family and knowing that they know. Don't go alone, she said. I won't. Adrian. She stopped. What, he said. Be careful, she said. And this time she meant it the way she had told Marcus she meant it. Not as courtesy, as a commitment. He said I will. And she heard in those 2 words the same quality, the same weight. She stood in her kitchen after the call and looked at the rose one more time and thought about all the things that were happening simultaneously in different parts of the city. Daniel, in a room with Moretti's people. Marcus watching access logs populate in real time. Adrian getting into a car to drive to the office of a man he had trusted for his entire adult life. And she thought about the strange and particular nature of trust. How it was not a single thing, but a layered and accumulated thing, built over time, through small repeated choices, and how it could be damaged in layers too, and how what she was doing right now, what all of them were doing, was not simply exposing a betrayal, but rebuilding a structure that had been compromised from below for longer than anyone had realized. Marcus called at 8:47. He's closing the session, Marcus said. I've captured everything. Isabella, the package that went to Moretti's people, the assembled documentation. Every source file is in what I captured this morning. We have the original. They have a copy. Send everything to the secure address I gave you, she said. And Marcus make a second copy and send it somewhere that has nothing to do with either of us. Already done, he said. She exhaled. Thank you, she said. Seriously, thank you. Tell me it worked, he said. Tell me in 4 hours, she said. I'll have a better answer. She changed clothes and made coffee she barely drank and sat at her kitchen table and waited, which was the hardest thing she had done in the past 10 days. Harder than finding the relay point and harder than sitting across from Adrian in that first conversation after she blocked him, and harder even than hearing Daniel's name come up in the context of genuine operational risk. Waiting was hard, because waiting was the one thing that was entirely outside her control. Her phone buzzed at 9:20. Daniel. A single message handoff documented. All parties present and audible. I'm walking out now. She pressed her fist against her mouth for exactly 3 seconds. Then she typed back, "Get clear and call me." He called 4 minutes later. "I'm out," he said. "I'm clean. Isabella. I have audio documentation of the complete chain. Caro's instruction to Moretti's direction to the courier, the identity of the contact inside the agency, and the specific contents of the package. All of it." "You're incredible," she said. "I'm exhausted," he said. "But yes, also that." She told him to go somewhere safe and stay there, and she would call him within the hour. Then she called Adrian. He picked up immediately. "I'm at Vane's office," he said, and his voice was different. Quieter. The kind of quiet that came after something had already happened. "Tell me," she said. "He knew," Adrian said. "The moment I walked in. He looked at me, and he knew that I knew, and he stopped. He didn't try to explain. He didn't try to deflect. He sat down, and he put his hands on his desk, and he said, 'How much do you have?' 'What did you tell him?' she said. "I told him everything," Adrian said. "The relay point, the secondary company, the property record, Marcus's capture from this morning, Daniel's documentation of the handoff." "How did he respond?" she said. A pause. "He cried," Adrian said, and the way he said it carried something profound and complicated and deeply human. Thomas Vane, 64 years old. He sat in his own office and he cried. And then he said, "I have been trying to find a way out of this for 3 years, and I couldn't, because the moment I stopped being useful to Caro, I became a liability, and I was afraid." Isabella was very still. "He was trapped," she said. "He was trapped," Adrian said. "He built something he could not control, and it became a mechanism that controlled him." "Does that change what he did?" she said carefully. "No," Adrian said. "But it changes what I do with it." She waited. "He is going to cooperate," Adrian said, "fully. He is going to provide documentation of every communication between himself and Caro going back 3 years. He is going to give us Caro's exposure in detail. He is going to do this because the alternative is worse, and because—" He stopped again. "Because," she said, "because I told him that the only path forward that preserved anything was honesty," he said. "And that was something I only knew how to say because someone said it to me first." The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at the rose. "Daniel has the handoff documentation," she said. "Combined with what Marcus captured and what Vane is going to provide, the chain is complete. Caro is exposed. The agency contact is identifiable. The operation is dismantled." "Yes," Adrian said. "It's over," she said. "This part," he said. "Yes." She understood what he meant. The operational part. The 4 days of relay points and disinformation and conference rooms and access logs. That part was over. The other part was still beginning. "Come here," she said. "When you're done with Vane, come here." A pause. "Isabella, not to resolve anything," she said. "Not to make any decisions. Just come here. Because you have been holding something very heavy since last night, and you should not hold it alone." A long silence. "All right," he said. She put the phone down. She looked at the rose on the windowsill. 8 days and still holding. She thought about Thomas Vane sitting in his office with his hands on his desk saying, "How much do you have?" the specific resignation of a man who had spent 3 years unable to find the door out of something he had built himself. She did not feel sympathy for the harm he had done, but she felt something for the trap of it, the way that the same instinct for self-preservation that had driven him to compromise everything had also locked him inside the compromise, unable to undo it, unable to escape it, maintaining the performance of loyalty because the alternative was a freefall he could not see the bottom of. She thought about what it meant that Adrian had walked in there himself. Not because it was the safest approach, because it was the right one. Because confronting someone you have known for 30 years with the truth of what they did requires your actual face, your actual voice, your actual presence. You cannot outsource that kind of reckoning. He had not outsourced it. That meant something. Her phone buzzed at 11:40. Marcus. She answered. "It's clean," he said. "Everything I captured, everything Daniel sent me, and the preliminary documentation from Vane's cooperation, it's a complete chain. Isabella, this is prosecutorial-grade material. Send it to the address I gave you, and one more copy to the backup," she said. "Already sent?" he said. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "the people who are supposed to handle this handle it." "And us," he said. "We go back to our actual jobs," she said. "And we never discuss any of this in any building that has a network connection." He laughed. It was a tired laugh, and it was real. "Go home, Marcus," she said. "And genuinely, thank you." She made fresh coffee. She put the first cup she had barely touched into the sink and made a full pot and sat at the kitchen table and drank a full cup slowly, the way she had not had time to drink anything in 4 days, and she let the quiet of the apartment settle around her. The intercom buzzed at 12:30. She pressed the button. She heard the elevator. One set of footsteps in the corridor. He knocked the same way he always knocked. Measured. Acknowledging her right to open it or not. She opened it. He looked tired. Not the way he had looked 4 days ago, when the tiredness was the particular strain of maintaining composure under pressure. This was different. This was the tiredness that comes after you have done something that demanded everything you had, and it is over, and your body is finally, for the first time in days, permitted to acknowledge it. She stepped back from the door. He came inside. He saw the rose on the windowsill, and he stopped for a moment, just looked at it, and she watched something move through his expression that she did not try to interpret, just let be what it was. Then he turned to face her. "Daniel is safe," he said. "He checked in 20 minutes ago. He's at a hotel on the north side under a name nobody associates with him." "Good," she said. "Vane's documentation is in the hands of someone I trust to place it where it will do what needs to be done," he said. "Kara will have federal exposure before the end of the week. The agency contact has already been flagged internally through a channel that has nothing to do with any of us." "And Lena," she said. "Handled," he said, not elaborating, and she did not ask him to. There were parts of his world that she understood and parts that she accepted without needing the details, and this was one of the latter. "All right," she said. He sat down at the kitchen table, not across from her this time, just sat. The posture of someone who has nowhere left to be that requires performance. She sat across from him. "Thomas," he said. "Before I left his office, he said something." She waited. "He said he watched me and my father together over the years. And the thing he always noticed was how much my father was afraid for me, how much he worried. He said that fear made my father make decisions that were about preserving safety rather than building something real." He paused. "He said he watched me do the same thing with you." She looked at him. "He said the difference," Adrian continued, "was that you pushed back, that you left, and that the fact that I sent you a rose instead of a security detail meant that something had shifted in me that he had spent 30 years waiting to see." The room was quiet. "He said all of that," she said. "While crying," Adrian said. "In his own office, at 64 years old, after I had just dismantled 30 years of his work." She looked at her coffee cup. "People know things about us," she said, "that we can't see about ourselves, even people who have done us harm." "I know," he said. "I'm learning that." She looked at him. "How are you?" she said. Not strategically, just asking. He considered it honestly, which was itself a change. "I feel like I've been standing in a building that I thought I knew completely," he said, and someone turned the lights on, and I can see for the first time how the walls are actually constructed. And some of what I see is—" He paused. "Not what I would have chosen." "That's allowed," she said. "Is it?" he said. "You're human," she said. "It's mandatory." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I meant what I asked you yesterday, when this was over. What you want." "I know you did," she said. "We're past the adrenaline now," he said. "We're not in a conference room. There's no operation running. It's just—" He looked at the table. "It's just the two of us at your kitchen table." "Yes," she said. "So I'm asking again," he said. "Not to push, because I need to know what direction to point myself." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the past 10 days. She thought about the fight, and the blocked numbers, and the rows and the relay point, and the conference room, and the name on the screen, and the moment she had chosen to call him, instead of deciding for herself what to do with the information. She thought about what it meant that all of it had happened, and she was still sitting here. "I want to try the real version," she said. "Not the version where you make decisions for me and call it love. Not the version where I accept that because I love you. The real version. Where we are actually two people who work together and trust each other and tell each other the truth, even when the truth is hard." "That is what I want," he said. "It will be harder than the past 4 days," she said. "The past 4 days had a specific kind of pressure that made everything clear. Real life is less clear." "I know," he said. "And when you are afraid for me," she said, "and the instinct is to close the circle, I need you to talk to me first, before you act, every time." "Every time," he said. And he held her gaze when he said it, not performing the commitment, just making it. She nodded. She got up and poured him a cup of coffee and set it in front of him and sat back down. He wrapped his hands around the cup. He looked at the rose. 9 days tomorrow, he said. 9 days tomorrow, she confirmed. He looked at her. "I'm going to bring you another one," he said. "When that one finally goes, if that's all right." She looked at the rose. She thought about thorns that had been carefully removed. She thought about the question it had been asking. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "That's all right." And outside Chicago moved through its ordinary afternoon, completely indifferent to the fact that in a small apartment kitchen on the north side, 2 people were sitting with coffee between them, and the careful, real, difficult, necessary work of beginning again spread out in front of them, like something that would require everything they had, and was, despite all of that, worth it. 3 weeks after the operation ended, Isabella's phone rang at 6 in the morning, and the name on the screen was Daniel Reyes. She answered before the second ring. "Tell me something good," she said. "Caro was indicted 40 minutes ago," Daniel said. "Federal charges, 7 counts. The agency contact he had been using for access was arrested at his home last night. Moretti is being brought in this morning under a separate but coordinated filing." He paused. "Isabella, it held. Everything we built held." She sat up in bed and pressed her back against the headboard and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. "You're sure?" she said. "I'm looking at the filing summary right now," he said. "The chain of custody on the documentation is clean. My audio from the handoff was submitted through a federal intermediary with full authentication. Marcus's access capture from Vane's session was entered as corroborating evidence. And Vane's cooperation agreement was finalized yesterday afternoon." "Vane cooperated fully," she said. "Completely," Daniel said. 3 years of communication logs between himself and Caro. Financial routing records. The identity of every intermediary who had touched the operation. He gave them everything. She was quiet for a moment. "How are you?" she said. "Tired," he said. "Relieved. Slightly amazed that it worked." "It worked because you were in that room," she said. "It worked because you built the architecture that made being in that room matter," he said. "Don't do that thing where you distribute the credit everywhere except to yourself." She almost smiled. "Thank you, Daniel," she said. For everything. Don't thank me, he said. Buy me dinner when the dust settles. Done, she said. She ended the call and sat in the quiet of her bedroom for a moment. The morning light was coming through the window at a low angle. The second black rose was on the kitchen windowsill, where Adrian had placed it 9 days ago, the day after the first one finally let go. It was still holding. She had stopped being surprised by that. She called Adrian. He picked up on the first ring. I know, he said. Daniel just told me, she said. My people confirmed it 20 minutes ago, he said. I was waiting for you to call. You were waiting for me to call, she repeated. I wanted to hear it from you first, he said. Everything that came after the first call you made to me, everything that happened because of the work you did, I wanted to hear the end of it the same way. She looked at the morning light. It's over, she said. This part, he said. And this time when he said it, it did not carry the same weight it had 3 weeks ago at her kitchen table. This time it sounded less like a qualification and more like an acknowledgement that something else was continuing. Come for dinner tonight, she said. Not a meeting, not a debrief, dinner. A pause that was shorter than it would have been 4 weeks ago. What time? He said. 7, she said. I'll be there at 7, he said. She hung up and got out of bed and went to make coffee and stood in the kitchen with the rose visible in her peripheral vision, and the city audible through the window and the specific quiet of a morning that was the first morning in a long time that did not have an operation running underneath it. It felt strange, not uncomfortable, just new. The way spaces feel new when you have rearranged them and your body has not yet learned the updated geography. She went to work. Her first meeting of the day was with the pharmaceutical client whose board had been fracturing when all of this began 11 days ago. She sat across from their CEO and 2 board members and walked them through the resolution framework she had developed. And she was present and precise and effective, and at no point did anyone in the room know that 3 weeks ago she had been doing something considerably more consequential than corporate crisis management at a conference table with a Mafia organization's inner circle. She was good at that, at containment, at keeping the different dimensions of her life from bleeding into each other in ways that created confusion. The meeting ended at noon. Marcus met her for lunch at a place 2 blocks from the office. They had not spoken properly since the morning of the vein capture, which felt like a different year, even though it had been 3 weeks ago. He set a cup of coffee in front of her before she sat down and said, Caro was indicted this morning. I know, she said. Daniel called. How do you feel? He said. She thought about it genuinely. Like something that was pulling in the wrong direction has stopped, she said. Not relief exactly, just the absence of a particular kind of tension. That's what relief feels like when you're too tired to recognize it, Marcus said. She looked at him. You did exceptional work, she said. The access capture was the linchpin. Without that, Vane's cooperation would have been credible, but not corroborated. You built the case, he said. I ran the technical piece. Marcus, she said. Accept the acknowledgement. He looked slightly uncomfortable, in the way that technically minded people always looked slightly uncomfortable with direct appreciation. Accepted, he said. Thank you. They ate lunch and talked about things that had nothing to do with relay points or disinformation or mafia organizations. And it was the most normal 45 minutes she had spent in a month, and she was genuinely grateful for it. She got home at 6 and cooked, which she had not done properly in weeks. Not something elaborate, something real. The kind of food that required attention and produced something honest. Roasted chicken vegetables bred from the bakery on her block. She set the table the way she set it when she was cooking for herself and someone she was comfortable with, not with ceremony, but with care. Adrian arrived at 7 precisely. He knocked the way he always knocked. She opened the door, and he stood in the frame with no coat, a dark shirt, his hands at his sides, and he looked like a man who had spent the day doing difficult things and had set them down before he came here. It smells like an actual kitchen, he said. That's because someone cooked in it, she said. He came inside. He went directly to the kitchen and looked at the rose on the windowsill and touched one petal very lightly with one finger and said nothing. She handed him a glass of wine. He took it. They sat at the kitchen table and ate and talked, and the conversation moved through the day. What he had handled after the indictment news. The conversations he had needed to have with the people inside his organization, whose positions now needed to be restructured in Vane's absence, the calls from his attorneys, the specific and bureaucratic aftermath of an operation whose success created its own considerable administrative weight. He talked about it openly, not performing openness, just talking the way people talked when they were with someone who knew the full picture, and they did not have to calibrate what to include or exclude. She asked questions. He answered them. She pushed back on one decision he had made about the restructuring, and he listened to her pushback without deflecting, and said she might be right, and they went back and forth on it for 10 minutes, and landed somewhere better than where either of them had started. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. It was also for them something entirely new. After dinner she made tea, and they moved from the kitchen table to the couch, which was the first time Adrian Valenti had been on her couch, and she was aware of that, in the way she was aware of all the small geographic shifts that had been accumulating since the night he knocked on her door, and she let him in. "I had a conversation with Dante today," he said. Dante, one of the 3 names on her original list. "He's clear," she said. Not a question. "He's clear," Adrian confirmed. "He's been clear from the beginning, as it turns out. But I pulled him in today and I told him what had happened, the full picture, Lena Vane, all of it." "How did he respond?" she said. "He cried," Adrian said. She looked at him. "That seems to be happening with a lot of people in your world lately," she said. "Dante has worked alongside Vane for 20 years, he said. He loved him. The way you love someone who has been a fixed point in your life for so long that you stop registering them as a person and start registering them as a permanent feature." He paused. He said he should have seen it. He said the signs were there and he missed them, and he did not know how to reconcile that with everything he thought he knew about his own judgment. She was quiet for a moment. "You told him he's not the only one," she said. "I told him that," he said. "Yes." She looked at her tea. "That's new," she said. "The telling someone they're not alone part." He looked at her sideways. "I'm aware," he said. She did not belabor it. She let it be what it was, which was a man demonstrating something rather than performing it, and that was the only form of change she was ever going to believe in anyway. "I have something to tell you," he said. She looked at him. "I have been in contact with a federal mediator," he said, "regarding the broader exposure that Vane's documentation created. There are things in those records that go beyond Caro. Things that have been in the architecture of my organization for a long time, that are not things I want to continue." She held very still. "Adrian," she said carefully. "What kind of things?" "The kind," he said, "that someone who described themselves as a crisis analyst with a background in behavioral economics might have anticipated I would eventually have to address if I was going to sustain anything resembling the direction I want my life to go." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are talking about structural change," she said. "I am talking about the work of making something real rather than just making it safer," he said, "which is different from what my father built, and different from what I inherited, and different from what I have been managing." "How long have you been thinking about this?" she said. "Longer than I have been willing to say out loud," he said, "and more seriously since the week you blocked me, and I sat in my car outside your building, and understood that the person I had been trying to protect did not need protection from the world. She needed me to be someone worth standing beside." The room was very quiet. "That is a significant thing to say," she said. "I know," he said. "I said it because it's true, not to produce a particular response." She looked at her tea again. "How does the federal mediator fit into this?" she said. "There are aspects of what Vane documented that if I engage with the mediator proactively and cooperatively, result in an outcome very different from what happens if they come to me, he said. It is not immunity. It is not an erasure of anything. It is a structured engagement that allows me to participate in reshaping something rather than simply defending what already exists. And the organization, she said. The people whose livelihoods and safety depend on the structure as it currently exists. That is the work, he said. That is why it is going to take time, and why it is going to require people whose judgment I trust and whose willingness to tell me when I'm wrong has been clearly established. She looked at him. You're asking me to be part of this, she said. I'm telling you what I'm doing, he said. And I'm asking whether you are willing to stay close enough to watch whether I actually do it. She felt the precision of that. The distance between asking her to be part of something and asking her to witness whether he was capable of sustaining it. The distance was not small. You understand what you're describing, she said. The kind of time it takes, the kind of difficulty. Yes, he said. And you are going into it eyes open, she said. Not because you think it will be quick or clean or produce the result you would design if you could design it. Because it is the right direction, he said, regardless of how long the road is. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Tell me about the mediator. Everything. Start from the beginning. He told her. He told her for an hour with the specificity and completeness she required, and she listened and asked questions that pressed into the corners of the plan, and he answered them without bridging or deflecting. And twice, she identified weaknesses he had not fully accounted for, and he acknowledged them directly, and they worked through them together right there on her couch with tea going cold on the table between them. At 9:30 she said, This is going to be the hardest thing you have ever done. I know, he said. Harder than the past 4 weeks, she said. Because the past 4 weeks had a clear target and a defined timeline and an operational framework. This doesn't. This is just the sustained daily work of becoming something different than what you were built to be. I know that too, he said. And you're still going to do it, she said. Yes, he said. And then, are you going to stay? She looked at him. I told you 3 weeks ago, she said. I want to try the real version. This is the real version. So yes, I am going to stay. Something moved through his expression that she did not try to categorize. She just let it be there. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. Ask me again in 6 months. He almost smiled, actually smiled this time. She had learned to distinguish between the two. She picked up the cold tea and took it to the kitchen and made fresh cups and stood at the counter while the water boiled and looked at the rose on the windowsill. 12 days on the second rose, still holding. He came to stand in the kitchen doorway. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes, she said. When you blocked me, he said. That night, the night you left. If I had come after you not the way I would have before, not with security and protocol and decisions already made. Just come. Myself. Knocked on your door. Would you have opened it? She thought about it honestly. She gave it the full weight of an honest answer. No, she said. He absorbed that. Because he said. Because that night, she said, I did not need you to come to me. I needed to have left. I needed to know that I could leave, and that the leaving would hold, that it wouldn't dissolve the moment you appeared. She looked at him. The rose did what showing up would not have done. It said, I hear you. I'm not coming to get you. I'm just here. He was quiet. The rose was the right choice, she said. I almost sent a car instead, he said. I know, she said. I know you almost did. What stopped me, he said, was thinking about what you said in the office, that I was making decisions for you and calling it love. He paused. Sending the car would have been exactly that. So I sent the rose. And then I sat in my actual apartment for the first time in 3 months, and I tried to understand the difference between protecting someone and controlling them. And I am not sure I fully understand it yet, but I am more sure than I was. She handed him the fresh tea. He took it. You sat in your apartment, she said. not the mansion. The mansion is an operational facility, he said. It stopped feeling like a home about 2 years ago. I think I kept calling it one because the alternative required admitting that something was wrong. She looked at him. Where do you actually live? She said. Right now, he said. Honestly, I have been staying in 3 different properties based on which one is operationally most practical on any given week. I have not had a fixed residence that felt like mine for... He stopped. A long time. She thought about that. That's lonely, she said. Simply. Not as analysis, as observation. He looked at his tea. Yes, he said. It is. She thought about the apartment she had chosen every object in. The bookshelves from floor to ceiling, and the window that faced the alley, and the kitchen table where she had cooked and eaten and worked, and had some of the most consequential conversations of the past month. She thought about what it meant to have a place that was entirely yours that fit you, because you had made it fit. You should find something, she said. Not another operational property, something that's yours. He looked at her. Is that advice or an assignment? He said. It's a suggestion, she said. From someone who knows what it costs to live somewhere that doesn't actually belong to you. He nodded slowly. They moved back to the couch and talked until 11, and the conversation shifted away from operations and mediators and structural change, and moved into the territory that had always been the most honest ground between them, not the dramatic moments, not the crises, but the ordinary accumulation of 2 people learning each other. He told her about the summer he turned 16, and his father made him spend 3 months working in a restaurant kitchen, because he wanted Adrian to understand what it meant to produce something with your hands. She told him about the year she spent in graduate school, questioning whether behavioral economics was what she actually wanted, or whether she had chosen it because it was the safest version of what she was capable of. He told her his mother had kept a garden. She told him she had never been able to keep a plant alive for more than 2 months. She looked at the rose on the windowsill and did not say what she was thinking, which was that this appeared to be changing. He left at 11:30. At the door, he stopped and turned around and said, I will call you tomorrow. Not about anything operational, just to call. All right, she said. Is that... He paused. Is that all right? That I just call... She looked at him. Adrian? She said. Yes, that is all right. Something in him settled. Good night, he said. Good night, she said. She closed the door and stood in the quiet of the apartment and listened to his footsteps go down the hall and the elevator open and close. Then she went to the kitchen and washed the cups and put out the light and stood in front of the rose for a moment before she went to bed. 12 days. She thought about Thomas Vane saying he had watched Adrian for 30 years and waited for something to shift. She thought about Daniel saying, "You built something real here." She thought about Marcus saying that's what relief feels like when you're too tired to recognize it. She thought about the night she had stood in a parking structure with both hands on the wheel and blocked every number that connected her to the most powerful man in Chicago. She thought about what it had cost to do that and what it had produced. Not a reconciliation, not a return to something that had existed before. Something new, the kind of new that is harder and more fragile and more worth having than anything built on easier ground. She went to bed. She slept well. The weeks that followed were not simple. She had not expected them to be. Adrian's engagement with the federal mediator was slow and procedurally demanding, and produced on more than one occasion situations where his instinct was to close the circle, and her role was to say clearly and without apology that closing the circle was exactly the pattern they were trying to move away from. He listened, not always immediately, sometimes after a day of processing, but he listened and he came back to the conversation, and the decisions they reached together were consistently better than the ones either of them would have reached alone. She learned things about him in those weeks that she had not known in 18 months of relationship. Not operational things, human things. She learned that he read history compulsively and had strong opinions about the Reconstruction era that he had never mentioned because he did not think they were relevant to anything they had discussed. She learned that he had tried 3 times to learn to cook and abandoned it each time, not from impatience, but from a specific perfectionism that made the learning phase feel intolerable. She learned that he called Dante every Sunday, not about business, just to call. He called her every day, not about anything operational, just to call. The first time he did it, she picked up and said, "Everything all right?" He said, "Yes. I just said I would call." She had to recalibrate the assumption she had not known she was making, that a call from Adrian Valenti necessarily meant something required attention. "All right," she said. "How is your day?" And they talked for 20 minutes about nothing critical, and it was, she realized afterward, the most normal thing they had ever done. He brought a third black rose 6 weeks after the second. He brought it without ceremony, not as a gesture, just as a thing he carried in along with everything else, and set it on the windowsill, and she looked at it, and then at him and said, "You have a type." "I know what works," he said. She laughed. It was not a moment she would have predicted 6 weeks earlier, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it required no translation. Daniel came back to Chicago in the 5th week. He met Isabella for the dinner she had promised, and they sat for 3 hours over food that neither of them finished, because the conversation was too absorbing, and she told him everything that had happened since the indictment, and he told her what the federal process had looked like from the inside, and they talked about what came next for each of them, with the ease of 2 people who had done something difficult together and had come through it on the same side. At the end of dinner, he said, "You seem different." She considered that. "Different how?" she said. "Less braced," he said. "You've been braced for something for as long as I've known you. Like you were always carrying a backup plan for when the current situation went wrong." She thought about that. "I still have backup plans," she said. "I know," he said. "But you seem less like you need them." She looked at the table. "I made a decision," she said, "about what I was willing to stop managing and start actually feeling. And that turns out to make a structural difference in how you move through a day." "The man with the roses," Daniel said. She looked at him. "He sent me a rose once," she said, "with the thorns removed, while I was in the middle of deciding whether he was worth going back to." "And," Daniel said, "and it said the right thing," she said. "In the right way, at the right time." "That's either very lucky or very deliberate," Daniel said. "With Adrian Valenti," she said, "there is no difference between the two." Daniel smiled. "Be careful with him," he said, not warning her, just saying it. "I'm always careful," she said. "Be careful and happy," he said. "Both. At the same time. You're allowed." She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for being in that room, for trusting the plan." "You built a plan worth trusting," he said. She came home that night and sat in the quiet of her apartment and looked at the third rose on the windowsill and thought about what Daniel had said, less braced. She tested that against the internal sense of herself and found that it was accurate, and finding it accurate produced a feeling she could only describe as the specific warmth of being known correctly by someone who had been paying attention. Her phone buzzed. "Adrian. How was dinner?" She typed back. "Good. He says you have good taste in symbolic gestures." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Tell him I said the thorns were the important part." She looked at the rose. Then she typed, "He already knows. Good night." His reply came in under a minute. "Good night. Call you tomorrow." She set the phone down. She thought about the night she had stood in that parking structure and blocked every connection she had to him. She thought about what she had been trying to say with that act, not goodbye, not I am done, but I will not accept a version of love that requires me to be smaller than I am. And somehow, across 10 days of relay points and conference rooms and names on property records and a man crying in his own office and a rose that held for 12 days past, what anyone expected, somehow the message had been received. Not perfectly, not without difficulty. Not in any way that did not continue to require daily attention and honesty and the willingness to name things that were uncomfortable rather than manage them into silence. But received. She stood up and went to the windowsill and looked at the third rose. still tight in its bloom. The thorns gone from the stem smooth and clean, the way someone had prepared it with care before it ever reached her hands. She thought about what it meant to love someone who had learned to remove the parts of themselves that cut the people they cared about. Not perfectly, not completely, but deliberately, in the direction of better. She thought about what it meant to be the person who stayed close enough to watch that work happen in real time, and to be honest when it was falling short, and to acknowledge when it was not. She thought about the woman who had stood in a parking structure 10 weeks ago, both hands on the wheel, making the hardest and most necessary decision of her life. That woman had known something. She had known that love without respect was just a prettier name for control. She had known that walking away from something that was hurting her was not giving up. She had known that the only version of this relationship she was willing to return to was one built on the ground of two people choosing each other with clear eyes, with full information, with the daily willingness to be honest, even when honesty was the harder path. She had been right, and the man who had sent her a black rose with the thorns removed had understood that she was right, and had chosen slowly and imperfectly, and with genuine effort to become someone capable of standing beside her. That was not a small thing. That was everything. She went to bed, with the city moving quietly outside her window, and the rose still on the windowsill, and the particular piece of a woman who had trusted her own judgment, at the moment it mattered most, and had been proven right, not by the absence of difficulty, but by the presence of something real on the other side of it. Chicago still said Adrian Valenti's name with a particular kind of weight. The world outside still did not know the woman who had looked at his empire and found the crack in its foundation and rebuilt it from the inside out. But she knew, and he knew, and that was enough. Because the most powerful thing Isabella Romano had ever done was not untangle a 40-year conspiracy or expose a 4.5-year deep cover operation, or rebuild the evidence chain that brought down Vincent Caro. The most powerful thing she had ever done was block a number on a Tuesday night in a parking structure and refuse to accept anything less than the truth. And the truth had found its way back to her, rose by rose, one thorn at a time.